beginning with Chris Nuttycomb.
Okay, my name is Chris Nuttycomb. I have a background starting in about 2009 in Scala was when I sort of first discovered functional programming. I've since moved on to Haskell and PureScript, but the language that I'm representing here today is a language called HAX, which I think it is not what I would call a functional language, although it does have some features that are found in other functional languages, like it has generalized algebraic data types and it has function literals and closures. The primary distinction that HAX has is that it really looks and feels a lot like a typed JavaScript or a typed ECMAScript. And it also is capable of compiling to a bunch of different front-end targets. It can compile to Flash, it can compile to JavaScript, and this has led to it having some use and representation in the game community. So that's it for me.
Hi, my name is Isaac, and I've worked in the front end for most of my career, mostly in JavaScript, which is probably pretty surprising to everyone. I've used PureScript. I really like PureScript and Elm, and I've done a little bit of experimentation with JC.js. That's basically it.
Hi, my name is Katrin Shefman, and my background is, well, I started with MFC, which is also considered to be front-end, but it's totally relevant to now. On the front-end with JavaScript, I've done plain JavaScript, I've done jQuery, I've done Backbone, I've done Angular, I've done React, which a little bit just shows that I jump between works, and every other job I just pick up another framework. Basically, I'm a backend person, so I'm here to represent Scala.js, and I've done enough different JS frameworks just to know that once I've learned Scala on the backend, I'd like to continue to write Scala and just to click the button and compile it to JavaScript so that I don't have to do JavaScript again. And that's the idea of the Scala.
Hi, I'm Davey Coons, and my history is primarily on desktop as well. So a lot of Swing, using either pure Java or JRuby. Did a lot with JRuby driving Java apps. And then on the other front end, the new front end, it's been primarily JavaScript, and then more recently Elm and PureScript. In the recent couple of years that those have existed.
All right, thank you. So this panel is specifically on sort of what are called alt.js languages. So one question I have for our panelists is, why alt.js? Like, what are some of the compelling reasons that people should consider functional programming in an alt.js language like Elm or Scala.js or PureScript or even HAX, as opposed to just using like FP libraries like Sanctuary and Lambda in ordinary JavaScript?
I guess I can start with that. So my short answer to that would be, at some level, when your program gets big enough and front-end apps are getting bigger and bigger, like they're huge, right? You know, can 40, 50. I mean, I guess there's probably front-ends that have 100,000 lines. That's a tremendous amount of JavaScript. And a library is fantastic. Lambda is great, but it can only give you so much. So at some point, you're still the compiler in your head, and I want to offload that to a tool.
Okay, so I guess we go.
Whoever wants to talk.
Okay.
Yeah.
And of course, I want to talk every time. So my 30 seconds. If you do Scala, you probably want to continue to do Scala. If you don't do Scala, but you have to do full stack, you can do it through Scala rather than doing JavaScript on both sides, which doesn't make any sense. Sorry for Node.js guys here. Lambda and underscore and what's not, that's nice, but it's peanuts in terms of functional programming comparing to Scala. Even for, I mean, okay, Haskell guys would say, yeah, Scala, but for JavaScript it's, yeah, Scala, so it's different. Generally speaking, JavaScript is like object-object, and Scala, it's like all the goodness of functional programming. So Scala.js it is.
I'd say that the reason you'd want to use an alt.js language versus straight JavaScript really has more to do with assurances. You can use a library that will give you nice abstractions, but you only get the abstract benefits of FP without what I would consider to be the real benefits of FP, which have to do with assurances and knowing that you can trace the lines in your code and that things are going to be immutable and that things are type safe and that functions are total. all those types of things really require a compiler to give those to you, and a library is not going to have your back when it comes to that.
I'm not sure that my answer is all that different. I think that the one distinction is that by using a typed language, whatever it may be, in the front end, you're able to exclude possible illegal states by construction. I sort of consider the compiler for me to be a brain prosthesis, that it makes it so that I don't have to be as smart to keep track of how pieces of my application are connecting to one another. And instead, that extra cognitive capacity that I get by offloading that to the language, I then recover or I'm able to use to look at things at a higher level of abstraction and find the patterns that might have been drowned out before simply by just trying to keep track of the states that my program can get into.
Okay, thank you. So front-end developers who are coming from a JavaScript background, they may not know one of these alt.js languages, or they may not know it at least very well. So my question to you is, if they're trying to decide between an alt.js language like Elm or Scala.js, or just using something like Redux or React or another JavaScript library that's sort of functional in nature, can you please help us, if they're concerned about project failure, can you please help us understand how these developers can come to an informed decision about whether to go alt.js or just JavaScript and FP libraries?
So I'll speak specifically from the perspective of Hacks here. As I mentioned, Hacks is really intended to act as essentially a typed JavaScript. And so the code looks very much like JavaScript with type annotations. And this means that you don't have to actually adopt, or you don't have to do a lot of the learning in order to simply make the small step to using types. And it leaves open by its support for algebraic data types the possibility of starting to use more abstractions that we're familiar with in the functional world. It is lacking higher kind of types, so we don't get the kinds of abstractions we can have in PureScript or in Haskell or Scala or yeah. So that is certainly a limitation. But in terms of adoption, there's a significant advantage, which is that I work with 3 coworkers who had never seen Hacks before coming to the company that I'm working at, and they were able to be immediately proficient and using the language, within the first week, and it didn't have the kind of learning curve that I think a lot of people are afraid of in hiring.
Let's see. What was the question again?
The question is, if you're a developer and you're thinking about one of these alt.js languages, or you're thinking about React and just doing FP and ordinary JavaScript, how can you make an informed decision if you're especially concerned about project failure?
Right. I think it matters what you want out of FP and why you're doing it in the first place. And if what you're trying to do is build a very large system with a large team and that's all needed today, you're not going to succeed in training a ton of people to write in a purely functional style or even get things to type check in a compiler like PureScript overnight. So there's value in things like React and Redux if that's what you want. But if you're really looking to build large things that are extremely stable and extensible, there's probably more value in what you have there. But I don't think there's really a general purpose answer to that question. I think it's really what you want out of it and kind of how you go about trying to achieve what you want. And those goals don't line up for everybody. So it's about picking the tool that's right for you. And I'm up here representing Elm for a reason. And I think that's the tool that's right for me, and there's a good argument for it for a lot of people. It doesn't mean it's the right tool for everyone.
Okay, so there's a lot of good things that were said already. Let's take a look. When I'm trying to adapt a new technology, there's a couple of things that I need to consider. First, that I'm not alone in this world. I have my JavaScript developers, and I'm working with them together. And there is a system, it's not only front-end with some Firebase behind it, but there is some real server that should run some real program in some language. So I don't know about other languages, and intentionally I won't say like in Elm you do this, but Scala.js is better, because I really don't know. Maybe Elm is better, or maybe Hux is better. But in Scala.js the idea is like this: if you want the full stack Scala, you can have it, which means you're writing Scala both for backend and the client, and it's actually you even statically type to your REST API. But if you have your JavaScript developers and your deadline like tomorrow, what you can do with Scala.js, and I'm not sure that the other languages can do, actually to write on the client side the heavy lifting, like talking to your servers, and managing cache, and managing all the APIs, and give it to your JavaScript developers who continue to enjoy Redux and React and Angular and what's not. And instead of them going and calling API and trying to figure out what the REST APIs are and how to cache things, they actually call into nice API. Why the API is nice? Because it's API that was created by you. So it's as nice as you can make it. There is one more thing into it. Once the JavaScript developers see how nice and robust the API is, they would like to see how you do it. And then you can take all the goodies that JavaScript has, another 15 seconds, I promise. All the things that you can do in JavaScript, you actually can port back to Scala by wrapping it. And at some point in time, your JavaScript developers will be accidentally, right? Like, I mean, not forced, but they would like to see, and they would come and they would start doing things with Scala.js rather than with JavaScript, because it's much more robust. And it's not familiar Scala syntax, but it's familiar frameworks that can be wrapped, and actually time to give them, because you don't have to rush them. It can be clearly separated till the full Scala, full stack has its time to come.
Okay, so I think most of the points have been mentioned. I would just bring up two things. One would be you have to have a pain point to justify any change. Like if you're on Angular and you say, oh, let's go to React, that's going to be a pretty hard sell. If it's, oh, we're using Angular and we have all these problems that we wouldn't have if we went to React, that is a much more compelling argument, or the vice versa, right? So if you have a bunch of JavaScript developers and no one there is convinced that there's any benefit, no one will admit that there's any problems with your existing code base, that's going to be a very difficult sell. I think you're going to have a really hard time justifying that. If you do acknowledge, like, hey, some of these things that we're hearing about are great, we'd like to do that, I think one of the things you want to consider is, do you have to swallow the transition in one go? Do you have to just like, okay, we were JavaScript, we're now whatever, Elm or PureScript or Scala.js, or can you bring that in piece by piece? And each of these, the solutions we're representing here, have different levels of ability to take them on bit by bit. And so that's, I think, a very significant thing you want to investigate with regards to your specific application.
That's great, thank you. So the whole functional front-end movement seems to be moving super fast. And not just sort of at the library level and framework level, but even the language level. You know, certainly for Elm and for PureScript, they change a lot and they break stuff a lot. Scala.js is relatively new, and until recently, I don't think could compile everything. I think now it's in better shape. Hacks has been around for a while, it seems. Obviously, new features, and you have the same problem with the libraries that you use in Hacks. Given that all this is changing so fast, how risky is it to embrace that versus just doing sort of straight up DOM coding or jQuery or something that's been around for 10 years? And why would we want to, why might we want to consider taking on that risk?
I'm going to give the same answer I just gave. You have to feel that there's a pain that this solves that's worth that effort. If you're like, oh, a little bit of risk is like intolerable to us as a group, then you want to go for something very safe. Like Scala.js is probably not going to, the language is very set. It's not going to be changing. For PureScript, the language is still not 1.0, it's in flux. And Elm, to some degree, is also in that boat. Hacks is probably pretty stable at this point, I would imagine, being around for 10 plus years.
There was a compiler breakage last week.
Okay. Well, so you have to be tolerant to that if you're going to go down that road. And if you are going to go down that road, we certainly experienced this with PureScript, that it's okay to take on a version of the language in the library and just sit on it for 6 months. Like, yes, new features have come out. Unless that fixes an actual problem you have right now, you don't need it. Just sit on whatever, 0.7 or something on PureScript. Yes, 0.8, 0.86 is out, 0.9. When it actually gives you something worth upgrading to, then do the upgrade. But like chasing an upgrade cycle seems an extra level of risk on top of a level of risk that you're already undertaking introducing this into your organization. You just don't have to do it. Just sit on whatever works for you.
I actually have a question for you guys, for the audience. How many of you are also backend developers, not only frontend? Would you mind to raise your hand? Okay, thank you. And how many of you are using Scala? Okay, I'll notice that. So, how many of you from the backend convinced that Scala is here to stay? The same number of hands, I guess. So that's the idea. So Scala is, and actually I have my co-team participant in panels that actually convinced also that Scala is here to stay. So given the fact that Scala is here to stay, and Martin Udersky, who is totally committed to Scala.js, take a look at his Scala Days note in New York City and also probably in Berlin in a couple of weeks. Scala.js is here to stay, which means, and since it's very, very flexible, and it's nothing but trying to take Scala code and compile it to the JavaScript, it means that it's prone to breakage only if there is a bug. But there is no like breaking features or something that I, as a participant in this panel, might envision. The idea is to pick up something that actually makes your work be easier. And if you're convinced to be functional on the front end, and you want something that is here to stay, Scala.js in this sense, yet another transpiler, but it's not, because you don't have to learn any other syntax, and Scala is robust.
Okay, so as far as what the risks are, I think that most of these questions can be answered by you do what's going to be right for you to your specific use case. And when it comes to what risks are involved in picking a functional transpiler over not, it comes down to whether or not your project's going to succeed. And if you have a very small project and you have people already know JavaScript, you're probably going to have success in JavaScript. The risks really with moving to something like Elm specifically are going to be the learning curve of the language and whether or not the language is going to change on you. And I would venture to say that both of those risks are substantially less than the risks that you incur with the instability that comes from imperative JavaScript development. You don't have things like undefined is not a function happen in Elm all the time. And so if that's something that interests you and that you don't like the risks that come along in the logic, then Elm gives you a very good programming model. And I think that there's more value in having a programming model that's elegant for the production of interfaces than just having isomorphism for the sake of isomorphism, where you have the same language on the back and the front. And as far as barrier to entry goes, I do think Elm is here to stay and is going to continue to grow. It's growing extremely rapidly. And the programming model is really the selling point for Elm. So the programming model of Elm has also spread. So the Redux is based on Elm. So we already know that this is a popular programming model for writing front-end code. And it's popular for a reason. It's because it's a very elegant way of describing front-end logic. And so the risks involved there, I would say, with the assurances of the compiler, are substantially less than the risks involved with imperative code bases. And if you're doing that same programming model in JavaScript, you still don't really have those assurances. And kind of the last part there as to whether or not this is going to stick around is I don't think it's just a matter of I don't think whether or not a language doesn't stick around is just a matter of whether or not it's committed to, but whether or not it's attractive for developers who are already in that space. And as someone who's written front-end code for my entire career, the Elm programming model is very, very attractive, and I would not want to go to a different programming model for the sake of having isomorphism with the backend.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Thank you. And we're going to switch questions there, jump right into the next one, just because there's Two more we have to get through in the span of like 4 minutes. So what we're going to do is like switch it up. Everyone will get a different question.
Okay.
Chris, you'll start off, answer this question, then go on to the next, and we'll try to make it down. So Elm seems to be doing a great job at marketing and the resources to help create a larger pool of functional front-end devs. But what can the other options like Hacks do?
Well, Hacks is, I guess, in somewhat of a difficult position among these languages in the sense that it has essentially only been widely adopted by the game development community, and I don't think there has it has gained a lot of traction outside of that. And I hate to say it, but I think that's largely because it doesn't have enough new ideas as a language apart from attempting to transpile to everything. Because it not only compiles to Flash and JavaScript, it also compiles to a JVM backend. It has its own backend. It'll compile to C++ and PHP. In that sense, I think it was intended to be, something accessible to everyone that would generate code that was usable in a bunch of contexts. But it, like other languages, and I'll pick on Go for a minute here, it doesn't add or take in really any of the new knowledge or advancements that have been made in the theory of programming in the last 20 years. And I think that is probably the biggest risk for it as a language going forward. Whereas I think that certainly languages like Elm and PureScript and Scala.js to a degree have learned something from the recent past.
Okay, thank you. So the purely functional front-end libraries, they use a vastly different style of programming than the standard imperative ones. And is there a way in which we could create APIs to bridge the two extremes that developers could use as like a stepping stone before they hit the strange, unfamiliar, purely functional territory?
Pass.
You'll have to repeat the question.
So the question is, the purely functional front-end libraries are way out there. Is there a way that we can create APIs that bridge between the two extremes of purely functional and then ordinary imperative JavaScript programming in a way that developers can use it as a stepping stone on their road to becoming a purely functional programmer?
I don't know how about other one.
I can answer that one.
Okay.
Yeah, just start
Hard
doing,
question.
Just start doing functional programming in JavaScript. Just start using Lodash or Lambda now, and almost all the concepts that especially with Lambda, when you get, when I introduce JavaScript programmers to PureScript, that's a gigantic leap. That is way more, Elm is approachable Haskell, and PureScript's we want Haskell that compiles to JavaScript. It's type classes, it's all there, right? So it's just a mountain of complexity hitting you in the face. But when I show them maybe, they're oh, maybe, like we use in JavaScript. Oh, partial application. I've seen that in Lambda. I know what these things are. So, ADTs and those sorts of things you've got to get across, but those are actually the low-hanging fruit, easy to display, oh, that's really cool kind of concepts. But you can bake in a lot of your early stuff, your early concepts, just in JavaScript, get people used to them, and then attempt to bring in your language that sort of enshrines that in the type system.
All right, thank you so much. And I want you to encourage everyone in the audience to track these panelists down after the talk and try to figure out which of these alt.js languages or maybe something else you're going to try for your next JavaScript project.